A wink after a joke, a wink to signal you're not being entirely serious, a wink that says we both know something the person standing next to us doesn't, all delivered in less than a single second without a word spoken. It's such a small, familiar gesture that almost nobody stops to think about how genuinely strange it actually is. Winking turns out to require a specific physical skill a meaningful number of people simply can't perform at all, and it works completely differently from the blinking your eyes do automatically all day long. Blinking and winking might look superficially similar, but they're functionally almost entirely different processes happening in your body. Blinking involves both eyes closing together, largely involuntary, automatic, and driven by reflexive systems that don't require any conscious thought or intention behind them at all. Winking, by contrast, involves deliberately closing just one eye while keeping the other fully open, a fully voluntary, intentional action requiring genuine conscious control rather than simply happening on its own. That difference turns out to be a genuinely difficult physical skill for a real portion of the population to master reliably. The muscle responsible for closing your eyelid, called the orbicularis oculi, normally activates on both sides of your face simultaneously and symmetrically as a default, coordinated pattern. Winking requires isolating and controlling just one side independently, essentially overriding a muscle system that typically prefers to act as a coordinated, matched pair rather than moving separately. A meaningful number of people, including plenty of adults who otherwise have no issues with fine motor control elsewhere, genuinely struggle to wink at all or need real, deliberate practice in front of a mirror before they can reliably manage it on command. Unlike many facial expressions covered elsewhere, winking doesn't carry one single, consistent meaning across the board. Its interpretation depends heavily on immediate context and the specific relationship between the two people involved in that exact moment. A wink can signal flirtation, an inside joke shared between friends, gentle sarcasm meaning the opposite of what was just said out loud, or simply friendly reassurance, all using the exact same basic physical gesture with nothing else about it changing. This flexible meaning becomes even more pronounced once you look across different cultures around the world, rather than assuming the gesture carries some kind of built-in, automatic universal interpretation everywhere. In many Western social contexts, winking often reads as playful, flirtatious, or a lighthearted signal of shared humor between two people who know each other reasonably well. In certain other cultural contexts, including parts of China and Taiwan, a wink directed at someone can instead be interpreted as rude, inappropriate, or even vulgar depending heavily on the specific social situation, the relationship involved, and who's actually receiving it in that moment. The exact same physical gesture carries genuinely different social weight depending entirely on where, and with whom, it happens to occur. Picture someone making a mildly outrageous claim at a dinner table, then immediately following it with a quick wink directed at just one specific person sitting nearby. That single gesture instantly reframes the entire statement for whoever received it, signaling it wasn't meant to be taken seriously at all, without requiring a single additional spoken word to clarify the joke out loud. Meanwhile, anyone else at that same table who happened to miss the wink entirely might reasonably walk away, actually believing the original claim was completely genuine and sincerely intended. One of winking's most distinctive social functions involves deliberately signaling shared, privileged information while simultaneously excluding someone else physically present in that exact same conversation, all done silently and instantly. A wink often communicates something close to, you and I both understand something specific happening here, and that third person standing right next to us currently doesn't share that same understanding at all. Successfully pulling this off requires genuine theory of mind, the cognitive ability to recognize that different people in the same room can hold different pieces of information simultaneously, a surprisingly sophisticated social skill most people never consciously think about using dozens of times throughout an ordinary week. This connects directly to when children typically develop the ability to wink deliberately in the first place, which turns out to happen considerably later than most other basic facial expressions emerge. Young children generally struggle both with the specific fine motor control winking demands and with the underlying theory of mind concept required to use it meaningfully in a social context involving multiple people at once. Deliberate, socially intentional winking tends to emerge later in childhood, once both pieces, the physical coordination and the more abstract cognitive understanding of shared versus separate knowledge between different people, have developed enough to work together properly and reliably in real social situations. Anthropologist Clifford Geertz famously used the exact difference between a wink and a simple involuntary eye twitch to illustrate a much broader point about how humans interpret behavior, in an influential essay still widely read and taught today. Geertz argued that from the outside, a deliberate wink and a random muscle twitch can look completely physically identical, yet mean something entirely different depending on context, intention, and shared understanding between the people involved. Understanding a wink correctly, in other words, requires reading considerably more than the physical action itself, which is part of exactly why the gesture has attracted this much genuine intellectual attention over the years, despite its small physical size. Other primates do show various eye-related behaviors, including certain closed-eye gestures during specific social interactions, but nothing closely resembling the deliberate, symbolically loaded human wink has been well documented in other species studied so far, despite extensive comparative observation across many primate groups. This stands in real contrast to expressions like smiling, which researchers have traced back through clear behavioral parallels in other primates, complete with documented intermediate forms bridging ancient and modern versions. Winking, at least based on current evidence available to researchers, looks considerably more specific to humans, tied closely to the kind of complex, theory-of-mind-dependent social signaling that appears to be particularly well developed in our own species specifically, rather than shared broadly across our closest primate relatives. It's worth being genuinely honest here about how much thinner the research specifically covering winking actually is, especially compared to more heavily studied expressions like smiling or crying, which have decades of dedicated, rigorous experimental research behind them from multiple independent labs. Much of what's understood about winking currently comes from more limited, observational, or anecdotal sources, rather than large-scale, tightly controlled experimental studies designed specifically to test it directly under laboratory conditions. This doesn't make the underlying pattern untrue, but it does mean the evidence base here is considerably less robust than some of the more extensively researched behaviors this channel has covered previously, and some of what's presented here leans more toward reasonable, well-supported inference than fully settled experimental fact. Understood this way, a wink represents something genuinely layered happening all at once, in less than a single second, far more than the small, casual physical gesture it appears to be on the surface. It requires real physical control over an unusually stubborn facial muscle most people never consciously think about, a solid working understanding that other people can know different things than you currently do, and enough cultural fluency to correctly judge whether that specific gesture will land as playful, meaningful, or actively inappropriate in that particular social moment and setting. All of that complexity, compressed into a single, casual, half-second facial gesture most people never think twice about using, dozens of times over the course of an ordinary week. The next time someone winks at you, and you instantly understand exactly what they mean without a single word being spoken out loud, remember that tiny exchange is doing considerably more cognitive and physical work than it ever lets on in the moment. That's exactly the kind of hidden thread this channel exists to dig up. If you want more of these, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.